Hello there, and thank you for joining us. My name is James Murphy, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal Philharmonic Society. We're about to have a little conversation because at the RPS, it's our great privilege to newly be presenting something called the Young Classical Writers Prize. It's something we set up in 2021 with a small gift from the estate of an eminent classical writer called Gerald Larner. He wrote for a number of newspapers, and his biography of Ravel is still cherished to this day. And with the small gift that he left the RPS, we thought, what could we usefully do to foster interest in writing about classical music? And so we've created this little prize, given, as I say, for the first time in 2021. And as we speak, it's early in 2022 and applications have opened again. We had a huge number last time, really encouraging indeed to see a lot of young people showing an interest in this, and we only want to encourage more to do so. So I'm joined here by three friends who have an insight from different perspectives in writing about classical music. And we're going to have a conversation. We've no idea where it goes. We haven't planned it. We're just going to talk about writing about classical music and hope it's edifying to anyone who might be applying for our little prize in the future, or anyone in general, if you're thinking about writing about classical music. So I'm very pleased to welcome, we have Katy Hamilton, the writer, presenter and broadcaster, and she was on the judging panel for the prize last year. Also, I'm very pleased to welcome Kate Romano. She's a musician, she's a producer, she's a writer. She's also the chief executive of a lovely arts venue worth visiting in Cambridgeshire called Stapleford Granary, and she's on the panel for the prize this year. And also joining us is Mark Rogers, a postgraduate pianist and the winner of the first RPS Young Classical Writers Prize. He wrote about Samuel Barber and entered that last year, an absolutely beautiful piece of writing, which you can see on our website. So we've got him here to offer his view and his perspective. I'd love to start by asking each of you, what led you to writing, if anything tangibly did, writing about classical music, and what you enjoy about it? Katy, it's something you do so much of. So let's start with you.
Well, so I guess I started writing about music because I decided I wanted to do a music degree, and I did my undergrad and my master's degree at Nottingham University. And it was whilst I was an undergrad, I was playing for the university choir, and the lecturer who ran the choir at the time encouraged me to help him put together the program notes for the choir concerts. So by the time I was a master's student, I was also writing some program notes for professional concerts that were taking place in the university venue. And then I went off and did a doctorate at the Royal College of Music, which as a conservatoire is very public facing, lots of concerts going on, bringing audiences into the building. So again, lots of opportunity to write program notes. And I really got a taste for finding ways to write about music for non-specialist audiences. So eventually, having kind of trained up as an academic and been a lecturer for a few years, I decided to go freelance. And yeah, as you say, James, that's what I do now. I talk about and write about music in lots of different fora, but generally for non-specialist audiences. And it's the joy of trying to kind of capture something of the story of a piece and its composer for somebody who may never have heard it before, that I find a really kind of enticing thing to do. It's the thing that keeps me writing.
Great, thank you. How about you, Kate?
Oh, I sort of came into it quite by accident, really. It was later than Katy. I'd already been working for about 15 years in academia at Guildhall, and my background had been as a performing musician and a composer as well. My doctorate was in composition. So that I'd never really written extensively, but at the point I left Guildhall, I realised there were just quite a few things I wanted to think about. And I think I've always used writing as a means to work stuff out. You know, it's a sort of process thing as well. So I just started writing some blogs with no real agenda, just things that have been on my mind for sort of probably 15, 20 years that I really wanted to get to the bottom of. Things about the sector, things about the purpose of music and the role it plays. And it was really this sort of computing it and processing it activity. But then one of them got picked up by Radio 3, and that led to me being asked to write the little stories for Radio 3, and one thing led to another, and I wrote about, I think, more than 150 of these tiny little stories, which I absolutely love. And I realised I'd just sort of fallen in love with this idea of creating a tiny little 3-minute story, and the art and the skill of that, which I developed over the years, sort of working out how to do it. I still write blogs. Since then I've written, oh gosh, countless CD notes and composer profiles. These days I write an awful lot of listings in my venue here at the Stapleford Granary. A lot is about marketing, writing the e-news, but like Katie says, it's all for non-specialist audiences. It's all about promoting an idea. It's about trying to find what is so special about a piece of music or as a composer and sharing that so that people will engage in it. I absolutely love it.
Great, thank you so much. And Mark, how about you?
Well, I don't, I'm sort of new to this, so I don't know if I can say exact. I guess the RPS Society Prize got me into writing about music. No, I guess I like talking about music as well, because my family isn't necessarily musical, most of them, but I always felt, I wanted to express to listen to this, but it's kind of hard when you don't listen to a lot of, especially classical music, I think, to just be handed a thing to listen to. So always coming up with something that could grab someone's attention. And when I was also young, in high school, I had to be in a program where we spoke about music in schools and places, and went around for a piano competition as sort of a young pianist, and had to do a lot of speaking and gaining people's interest. So I guess the writing version is just a solidified kind of form of that, trying to pull people in and trying to speak. The most difficult thing I found is figuring out where the audience would be, where to meet that, how much to go into a certain depth here, how much to go into anecdotal things, and that I find really interesting. And so I hope to be doing more.
Great. Well, you've definitely got the talent for it. I mean, we're obviously with our prize addressing, trying to get young people to get into writing about music. For me, I obviously having to write essays on any subject, but certainly music included, was generally formidable. Just the word essay gives me the shivers to this day. And another thing that complicated it, when I went to university and did a music degree, we weren't allowed to, there's one word we weren't allowed to use in any of our essays, and the word was I. So it's almost like we had to remove ourselves from the essay writing process. How was that for you at the start? I think we've all had to write, music, write about music under obligation when we were young. How did you sort of turn that into a positive thing? Anyone?
Well, I'll comment on that, because I'm very much the thing about not being able to say I in a university essay definitely was the same for me. And I look back now on the first program notes I wrote in 2004-05, and they're really formal. They're really kind of, I know how to write an essay, so now I will write an essay in a form that is about this Beethoven string quartet. And actually, I love what Mark was saying about the writing coming from the speaking, because actually that's something I didn't start doing until after I'd started doing the writing. And I think thinking about the way that we talk to each other is a really lovely way of finding a more kind of a friendlier and more approachable way of then writing about music, and realizing that that's okay. Actually, I think I hung on to weird rules around university writing in other sorts of writing much longer. Like Kate, actually, I had a blog when I first went freelance. I started a blog on my website, and I loved the freedom of that, because there were no rules. The rule was that I wrote it once a week. That was it. It could be about anything, and I could make it as long or as short as I wanted to. And it was all about, it kind of puts yourself back in the picture in a new way. And I think that can be a really powerful tool, because it's about how to figure out how you're talking to the people that you want to listen to what you're saying, which precisely links into Mark's point about targeting your audience, what is and isn't an acceptable level of detail to go into. And that is all about conversation. Actually, it's about having an awareness of who it is that you're trying to write for or talk to in the first place, and then listening. If you get it wrong, figuring out how you might work with a venue or work with a group of people to find a way so that you actually have a common language. And that's the kind of exciting bit, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Katie. I think I was fortunate in a way that my undergraduate and even my postgraduate wasn't very essay heavy. So I never felt that burden of having a sort of correct way to write. And actually, it's the talking that's really key, isn't it? That we're all saying this, and I think that they're hard. You can't separate them actually. The majority of my self-training, I suppose, as a writer was writing for radio, which is all about, you know, it's all about talking it. So you write in a very conversational way, quite naturally. And even now, if I'm writing something for listings or marketing or program notes, I always speak it. And if it doesn't sound good, I change it. So I think I'm always writing for speaking, even if it's going to be read. Always, actually. I think it just flows better, and it feels more like me. And I think also there's a sort of freedom and a liberty as well about being asked to write stories about things. It takes it away from an essay. If you're asked to write a story, that's exactly what it is. It's got to capture people's imagination. And especially for radio, if you've only got 3 minutes to tell a story, you really have to think hard about, you set the scene, you have to then hone in on a little bit of detail and then be able to stand back from it and still leave someone a little message to take away. That's a lot to pack into 3 minutes, and it feels a world away from a very sort of structured essay like you might write as an undergraduate. I think it's quite a different thing, isn't it?
If I can just jump in for 1 minute with silly anecdote here. So one of the things that I used to do when I was first giving a lot of presentations was, just like Kate, I used to read things out loud. I used to do presentations to one of my soft toys on the other side of the room. And when I taught students at the RCM about presentation skills to audiences, I used to bring in soft toys and put them around the room so that they had to talk to the cuddly toys. And I was absolutely delighted to discover that then, like, years later, I went to Bletchley Park for a day out, just to go and look at the museum. And they just got their new Alan Turing exhibition open. And there in the middle of the display is Alan Turing's teddy bear, who he read all his presentations to before he gave them as official papers. I was like, yes, vindicated by a great scientist.
Yeah, it works. But you do have to say, or even just, you have to say it as well out loud. You have to do that. You can't even just read it in your head. It has to be a performed thing. It's totally different.
Yeah.
Mark,
that's
Mark,
good to know.
Did you have a teddy bear, Mark, when you wrote your winning entry?
Well, I sort of read it to the wall, which is a little more boring, but in high school as well, my grandmother was an English teacher, so I'd always go, what about this essay? What do you think here? And so sort of refined some sort of writing thing, which is also a nice way to just chat about something else, you know, and go through things. So reading it to someone, read it in my room, my flatmates must hear it and think it's a little strange that I'm just talking to myself. But then I find I pick up on so many things. I go, oh my God, I would never have read that if I had said it out loud. And it goes out right away.
Yeah, it really shows up the slightly kind of cheesy bits, doesn't it? Or cliquey bits, or a bit too word salady. You think, oh, that's horrible.
Or a joke that won't work. Yeah.
What we're technically talking about here is like whether ends up being in your voice or a voice that you imitate. Because I'm sure I've written so much over the years about classical music in all different regards, where I feel like I'm writing in the voice I ought to write. There are circumstances like that, like perhaps a funding application, but other circumstances where I think one of you has already used the word freedom, and it's that question of like, how free do we think we can be when we're writing about music?
That's interesting, actually. I just read I'm midway through the big doorstopper new Mozart biography. I don't always read these things, but by Jan Swafford, who does all those really great biographies that I found really interesting. I read his one on Beethoven, so I got the Mozart one. And he says in his foreword that I think he's also done Brahms and Charles Ives. I think that's all the other ones. And for each person, he's found a sort of different tone based on who he's writing about, not intentionally, but with Mozart, and I even noticed this before I read the preface, it seemed much more relaxed. And he said it was because of the Mozart's letters, which are sort of on the verge of informal to obscene. So it's sort of it was a really interesting idea that this was a much more relaxed and much more conversational piece of writing, and it's very easy to read because of that.
I think it's difficult if you're writing about a piece that's got a huge amount of, that feels like it's got a huge amount of kind of stuff behind it, like you're writing about a late Beethoven string quartet or something. It can feel that you're having to confront all this material that's been accrued around it over the last 170 years. And that can be very daunting. And it's amazing actually how, I mean, I don't know whether you find this as well, but if I read enough of a certain style, even if I'm reading a novel and I read the novel very intensively for a few days, I find that the way that I end up speaking and writing emails gets inflected by the style of the novel. And actually, one of the things that if only that would last, I could be like Dickens. But one of the things that I think you end up kind of doing when you start writing publicly or talking publicly, like James talking about finding his own tone of voice, is I think I certainly find this, I kind of like try on different identities. And I certainly did this when I did early radio broadcasting as well, that different ways of trying to figure out what you sound like and what your intonation is, and that your awareness of the people you like listening to or you like reading, like, can you kind of do that? Does this feel too formal? And then you sort of, I guess you end up amalgamating various little bits and bobs that you find in other people's writing or speaking that you like into a style that increasingly ends up sounding like you. And I remember being quite taken aback the first time somebody I knew went to a concert at the Wigmore Hall and said, I knew from the first paragraph it was your program notes. And I thought, oh my God, I have no sense of trying to kind of cultivate a voice that sounds like me. But somehow I seem to have got one without trying, just by dint of doing a lot of it and reading a lot and then thinking about the writing that I like, that other people's writing that I admire.
I think it's, for me, there's a couple of things that I do. I don't think I'm as sophisticated as you, Katie, in what my process is. I don't think I've ever tried to sort of imitate or not imitate. Or there's just two things. If I can't get it going, I have to listen to the music. The music absolutely unlocks it. So if it's a radio story, the minute I know the music that's going to be with it, it's off. Until that happens, I just can't start. So again, if you're writing about the piece of music, I put it on while I'm writing, and it's the only time ever I will listen to music whilst working. Can't read and listen to music, can't practice listen to music, but for writing, it just seems to unlock something that I can't quite explain. And the other thing I do is, if it really feels like it's stuck, is I just imagine I'm writing to somebody. You just imagine that person, whether it's someone like like my dad, or someone who's just not come to it before, and it just becomes like a conversation. I think I turn it into a conversation, and then it just feels like me.
That's lovely. I think sometimes we could perhaps be overwhelmed by the notion of the audience to whom we're writing to. I mean, Mark you said yourself earlier on about the challenge of knowing where to meet the audience, like even have a sense of who they are. And I guess, there may be a default thing amongst us. Well, instantly think they're judging us. They literally get the program out. They're looking for the errors. They're looking for I don't know why we sort of would automatically default feel that. But can we talk a little bit more about like that fear of the audience, that finding of the audience? I mean, I think Kate's like solved it instantly. Pretend you're writing to a loved one. But let's talk more about that. Sort of like dialing into whom you're actually writing for.
Well, a little plug for the prize. The thing that I was given, so there's an opportunity to write, and so the one I was given was for Wigmore Hall for a recital with Alexandra Tarot, and I just kept thinking about all the times. So I'm going to the academy down the street, so I've been to the Wigmore Hall lots and lots and lots of times, and just think of all the variety of people that sort of are at the Wigmore Hall, and how intelligent and well, I mean, they've probably heard every piece ever performed there and have been going for years and years. So that was a slightly intimidating sort of figure out how to, where to go from that, and not to rely too much on anecdote, and also not to become an analyst and do a sort of, I mean, I can't do Schenkerian analysis, but I mean, not to do anything that would fly over someone's head like Schenkerian would fly over mine. So yeah, that was sort of intimidating. But also from that, I've got to do a few more afterwards. So I'm sort of working on one right now. So that's been great. Thank you.
Great.
Do you have a style, Kate, for program notes for your venue? Have you got a kind of sense of?
Yeah. Well, we don't actually do programs. We have very generous listings on the website, so they take a lot of care. There's a lot of care taken over those, and I think it has naturally evolved over I've been here 16 months. Over the time of doing it, it's become a sort of house style, not consciously. but it's definitely there. I think people could probably tell who's written it, and it's consistent, and I think that's really important for a venue. I was just thinking as Mark was talking there about this, and something that they say at Radio 3 a lot, it's a phrase that I really love, and it's knowledge lightly worn. And I think about that a lot when in all sorts of contexts, actually. I think if you have listened to, if you're writing about a composer and you've really listened to a lot of their music and you've read what you can, maybe not every book that there is, but you know, you've done your homework, that puts you in a really nice position to talk about it, because you're not overburdened by getting the facts across, or rather, you know what facts to get across because you've done your homework. But also, it leaves you space to just be a little bit more sort of speculative about it, and to say, I enjoyed this, and to say that with the confidence because you know your stuff. I think that's where it comes from, that confidence to be yourself, and the liberation sort of comes with actually having done your research is really important. And then you can slightly float on the top of it and make it just that bit more communicative and conversational because you know what you're talking about. I remember the first days as a lecturer when I first started, when I wasn't that much older than the students, literally clinging on to facts because I didn't really know my stuff. You know, I don't know whether you relate to this, Katie. You know the way you've learned it the night before, and then you have to lecture it, and you don't really know it, partly because it's just been thrown at you, and also because you're quite young and you just don't know as much stuff as you do when you're older. You don't know as much music, and you sort of clutch onto the facts and the data, but they don't really make sense in you because you just don't know as much stuff. And I think that's something for me that's just come with age. It's sort of, don't know everything, far from it, but I know enough to know what I need to know, and then to build on top of that, and also to be able to draw on lots of other areas. So you're not just talking about one particular piece, but you know about the context, you know about the other composers and the performers, and perhaps the architecture and the painters, and that's where it becomes very personal, because it's all your passions and all your interests start to, and then you tell your own story because of just the other stuff that you know. You don't have to be an expert in it all. She said quickly, being an expert in absolutely nothing. You just have to be curious, I think, and bring it all together in your own voice.
And I imagine you're also being asked to write based on your, not just what you know, but also your way of translating what you perceive in the music, whether that's intellectual or the opposite, just emotional in a way that people will then be able to connect to if they're not used to maybe listening in that way, or listening in something like that. Even if you don't know the date or something, then a section about, you know, just what it makes you feel. I have to say, I think I used I a lot in the essay that I did for the competition. So I don't know if that was a bad thing. Well, I guess it wasn't a bad thing.
I was at university in the dark ages, and perhaps they've relaxed a bit on that now. I love this as well, that I think that to start with, I felt like when I had an essay to write, I had to transplant certain facts from the library back to the lecturer in the appropriate fashion. And it was only halfway through my degree, I picked up on, Kate's just said the words, I've written them down in capitals for my own benefit: be curious. I suddenly realized that my essays would be better if it was something I actually wanted to find out for myself. And the essay was my process of finding the thing out. I wish someone had told me that a long time ago. Be curious. I love it. Great. That's great. I'm happy. I've got my mantra. You carry on. What to say? Listen, one thing I wanted to touch on, like I just came up earlier on, is a bit like that sense of what we need to tell. And I think in a program note in particular, or if you're writing about any piece of music, a trap that I've fallen into lots, I'm sure a lot of people do, is the sort of the chronological narrative description, and then the bassoons enter, and then because you've started at that level, you've still got 50 minutes of a symphony to account at that level. It's like, should you resist that at all, or how do you know when to pull back from that and go dive into that? Help.
One thing that's shifted quite a bit, I think particularly post-pandemic, actually, is the length of program notes that venues now ask for, which tends to mean that you don't end up getting the kind of massive book with thousands of words of stuff. Generally, things are more compressed, and that's really nice because somehow it frees you from this, we will now write a big box about this piece, and now we will write a big box about this piece. You can actually kind of flow your way through the program in a way that lends itself much more to being able to be conversational. The train timetable thing, of, yeah, now the bassoon comes in and then the trumpet and blah. I mean, I tend to do precisely actually what Kate was saying about when she gets stuck listening to the music, to try and kind of galvanize thought. I always put the piece on. I do a load of reading of, yeah, like dates and figures and where were they and did they get given a horse for writing the piece or whatever. That genuinely happened to Beethoven. Congratulations on your cello sonata, have a horse. But then I listen to the piece and I listen to it with generally without the score. I might just check a couple of markings if it looks like it's going to be interesting. And then I just listen out for the things where I can say listen out for, because if you're going to have to read the note in advance of the thing, and then you're in the dark and you can't see it anyway, and of course you're not going to follow a thing that says then it goes into E flat major in bar 27 when the oboe comes in. Of course you're not, you're going to have forgotten it. So, but if you can say, you know, extraordinary silence or massive noise or strange chord or whatever, then like one or two details is generally enough, and it's going to be much more memorable for the person trying to negotiate their way through the piece than this horrible kind of blow by blow mega essay that, like Mark says, like trying to do Schenkerian analysis, trying to do some massively complicated thing that of course you're not going to remember whilst you're listening. Yeah, so it's partly just about like how you use the program in a concert and when you're going to be looking at it.
We've taken that a stage further here at my venue. As I said, we don't have program notes at all, but instead we're really big on the conversation. So everyone introduces their pieces as they go and talks about them. And when I first said, it sort of started during the pandemic, and of course we did what we could and we didn't have programs. And I thought, do you know what, this is great. Nobody looks at a program in the dark. They can't read it, they can't remember it. It's a huge amount of time to write, as you know, Katie, to write program notes. And if there's only me doing it, we're doing 3 events a week, and you know that's massive. So we have this very careful listing, but after that, all artists and they do it, and they're good at it. You know, we haven't had one person who said I don't want to do this. They all introduce their pieces, and it's very conversational, of course, because they're talking to an audience, and it's great. I mean, by and large, it's fantastic because they might say a little bit about the background of the piece, but then they talk about what they love about it or what they've found in it or their approach to playing it, and gosh, it's interesting. I think, you know, and it's not really a million miles away from probably what I would write about. It's that sort of slightly insider's perspective on it as well that I think audiences find interesting. It is the what I love or what you're going to hear here or listen to what the composer did there. You know, it's what excites us is going to excite them. I'm all about the chat. Love the talking. So connected.
Actually, Mark, I don't know, I'm just putting you on the spot straight away. How is that? Have you written much about, because you're a pianist, have you written much about piano music and found that you know, you have more of a kind of an authoritative, authorial voice there, or not? Does it matter what you're writing about?
In terms of, you mean in like the research informing the playing and vice versa? Yeah, I think I do like to know as much as possible just because I'm curious about it. It's not like I'm going to tell everyone every detail. For when I discovered, because I do a lot of songs, because I'm technically an accompanist, if we're using the A word. But the notes that Graham Johnson writes for songs, which are on the Hyperion website, when I discovered those in lockdown and everything, because he writes just about everything there is to write about every song, and more, and about the historical context. I mean, every Schubert song, because he's recorded them all and written it. So then knowing all of that about each song, I don't like to think about it while I'm playing, but it has really, especially over time and learning more and more about, you know, every time I play a song, it's very easy to go and just read, you know, several paragraphs, sometimes more than several paragraphs about a song, and to have that context. And so definitely writing about it is it's a bit different. I don't know, but I wouldn't say it massively changes the performance until in a minute way. But overall, you just have a bigger grasp, especially of style, maybe, and relating the styles to each other, and knowing what you should be playing like in a piece. The sort of phrasing, structures, and tone quality, and sound, and all these things. I'm not an expert. I don't know. That's my sort of guess answer.
Just leading on from what you said at the end there, like about phrasing, sound quality, tone, another thing I think that sort of booby traps and perhaps scares us a bit when we're coming to write about classical music is terminology and jargon and never quite knowing what to say. I've written program notes in the past where it's for that, as you described it already, that non-specialist audience. And then I almost get into an existential funk thinking, well, will they even understand what a movement is? And do I have to explain what that is too? So what would each of your thoughts be on that and the explanation of terms or prior knowledge?
Well, a lot of venues that I write for have effectively tell you what they are hoping for, because a venue will know its audience well enough to be able to give you some basic guidance. So certain organizations that I write for say, if you use technical terms, and then they'll give some examples, then either you need to explain them in the text in a bracket, or we'll put a little glossary down the side. If it's really absolutely vital that you say ritornello or whatever, then fine, we'll explain it. But otherwise, I don't know, like, it's good to go to the venue and go to a concert and see who you're surrounded by to get a sense of what the audience might know, what they might be talking about at the interval, getting a sense of that. I mean, I totally, like, the thing about movements, I totally get James's James's panic, because one of the other things I do outside of writing is teaching at City Lit, which is a further education college for adult learners, and I teach music history courses there. And a lot of my students are very, very keen concert attenders. They are friends of the Wigmore Hall, or they go to the Royal Opera House a lot, or they spend a lot of their summers going to concerts and operas in this country and elsewhere. And one of the questions that I got asked most in the first couple of years of teaching there was people who would come up to me at the end of a session and say, so the thing is, though, when they say the symphony is in G major, what does that actually mean? And I thought, oh my God, nobody, okay. But of course you can't do it all in a program note. And that's okay, because there are certain terms that, like movement or in G major or whatever, that are kind of, we understand it as a sort of basically shared idea of talking about something, even if we don't know specifically what it means. They can Google it, or they can ask you afterwards. And then I guess it's, avoid technical language unless you absolutely need it. And if you need it, probably look to explain it. And if you're writing for a particular audience that you don't know, or venue that you don't know, then you can always go and ask what you think is appropriate, whether or not a particular word is too complicated or not. And I generally am really resistant to putting in anything that assumes that the audience is going to know something already. So anything like, as we all know. So why should we all know? Maybe we don't all know, actually. So don't patronize, but also don't assume that you're already talking to people who have read all of Jan Swafford's biographies cover to cover and will be able to recall what page a certain thing happens on. It's back to the conversation thing, actually. Most of us don't use highly technical language in a conversation unless we're talking in a professional context. And so it's the same thing.
I totally agree. It's a brilliant answer, Katie. I think, never be patronising. It's a journey of discovery together. We're all finding stuff out, and I think there's an absolutely correct way to list things. I would never change that, and it may be that not everyone understands what an opus number is or something like that, but there is a completely correct way to do things, which I think should never be disregarded. But I think, if I was reading something about a different sector, or even something historical or something in the news, I wouldn't expect to understand every word, because it's not my area. But there's enough there for me to basically understand what's going on and to go and look something up if I need to. I think that's the balance. And you do get to know your audiences, don't you? You know your Wigmore audiences. I know my audiences here, and I know the Radio 3 audiences. And I think that, again, going back to speaking, there's another very good rule for radio, that is, if you use a word that somebody doesn't understand immediately, you've lost them for the next two sentences while they think about it. It's not quite so bad, perhaps, in written material, but if you're speaking, especially on the radio, if they're pondering something, they've lost you for the next sentence, and then you've lost them for the next bit. So it's really important to be really clear in what you're saying. And sometimes, just occasionally, I know that I've used exactly the right word for a context, but it's been edited out, it's been changed because they said it's just not familiar enough, or it's not something. And it's absolutely right to do that. And that might not be a musical word. That just might be a word that's not familiar to people. So there's a lot of common sense that comes into it as well. It's not just a music terminology thing. I think it's a general, you know, it's bigger than that.
And I think what you were saying, Kate, about the about not talking down to people or not also talking over their head, but you know, like as a musician in a playing context, when I've been in, like, especially in past, when you're in high school or something, like when you're younger and you're in a group where everyone is much better than you, or you're really trying to keep up, or even in a class or say something in like a learning context, just the way that everyone wants to meet the higher level, no one wants to meet the lower level maybe. And so if you really need to, I think the way that I've tried to find a way around it is, if I have to say this goes into E flat minor here because it's a massive change, it's a huge thing in the piece, it's a big moment, then maybe finding ways to describe E flat minor around it, so that someone who's going, I don't know what E flat minor is, but he's described it as this dark, somber passage, and then maybe something to listen for, so that they'll know, oh, that was the E flat minor, but that was, or I mean, that's maybe a bad example, but something like that. I don't know if that's good.
That is why the composer took it into E flat minor, for the effects. Yeah. It's not they do it because they know, you know, they did it for the effect that people hear. So you're absolutely right to describe the effect of it rather than the technicality of what it did.
Well, I hope that works. I mean, it's just always finding that way of just sneaking it in so people can feel that, because I do it too when I read something. I have no idea what it means, but I can figure out what that part of the sentence means, and so, oh, that's what that must mean, and then I feel like, well, I've figured it out. It's a little endorphin there, but yeah.
It might hearten any younger people watching this for us to say that it's something you never solve as well. So it's not like I'm sure you get more fluency, more competency in things, and we all generally get more confidence in things. But nonetheless, that if the words just fell out of you and they just fell on the page, it almost like it wouldn't be real, or something that you have to, as Kate's talking about listening to the music you're writing, you've got to be meeting the music yourself, conversing with it. Would you say?
Oh, I think it's dead hard writing. It's really hard to do a really good piece of writing. It's just, you know, I don't know. I seem to start every one thinking, where's this going to come from? Where's the heart of this? It almost feels like composing. You know, it's that hard. And so many times, the first draft of something, not one word of it ends up in the final version. It's just a constant culling and pruning and refining. And for me, I don't know if other people do it that way, but you know, what ends up on the page looks like it just tripped out of the pen or the keyboard, and you think, God, if you saw the absolute rubbish I wrote to get to that final version, you wouldn't even recognize it. That first draft is frankly shameful. It's just, you know, and then it's just a constant process of refining and being brutal with it until you kind of find the heart of it and think, again, I suppose going back to those early days of blogging, I used it as a process to find out what I wanted to say. Sometimes I don't know what it is before I actually start writing, and then there's a little light bulb moment where you go, now I know what this is about, and then you can kind of go back and shape it all. I almost can't describe it. There is something a little bit strange about it that I always hope works every time, and then it does, but I can't quite, you have to find it every time. There's not formulaic, for me at least. It always feels like, God, manage that one, don't really know how. Okay, what's you know what I mean? It's difficult, it's really hard. Do you relate to that? Is that just me?
I absolutely relate to that. I mean, I think a big part of it is storytelling, right? You're trying to tell the story of either a piece or a concert, or the pieces within a whole program of something. And that means that you might have some ideas of some, you know, you might know kind of act 2 and act 3 of what's happening, but you have no idea where the Once Upon a Time is. You need to kind of start the thing off in a way that means that you're going to grab the reader and then bring them with you through the story. And I guess the other thing that is probably quite an important thing to say is that one of the really fun and interesting things about writing about music, which, yes, you don't, like James says, you don't solve it as a problem. It's always difficult, but it's differently difficult and interesting depending on what you're writing about and how much you already know and all that sort of thing, is that what you say about the piece will change the way that people who read what you've written will listen to it. and you're in control of that. And that's one of the reasons why, if you said it goes into E flat minor and you don't give them any more information and they don't know what E flat minor is, then that's hopeless. But if, like Mark says, you said E flat minor and it's a dark and funereal or somber moment and in come the trombones, then suddenly you've given your listeners significance and meaning of what that moment is. And there's something about the kind of the play of the story of the whole concert. I really love trying to find a kind of narrative to lead you through a whole program of stuff. The story of the humans who made the music, because that's why I find composer lives interesting. It's the people who actually wrote the thing down. And then how you can do that in a way that's going to reach the people that you're telling the story to. That's why it's hard, but that's also why it's really rewarding, because by the end of it, you can have written your, 800-word novel effectively, or your 3-minute script that actually has changed somebody's experience of what it means to listen to these pieces of music that we care about, and that are being performed by people who also really care about what it is that they have to say about it.
Mm. And also in terms of the prize and all, I mean, what are the sort of things that, because I don't remember what I wrote and I really should have read it before I came here. What sort of things were you guys looking for and trying to see in some writing?
James,
I'll happily pass to Katy in that because, she was one of the judges last year, and then Kate's yet to see a bunch of entries, but she may have some thoughts as well what she might be looking for this year.
Well, I guess I wanted you to do me a good Once Upon a Time. I wanted the first sentence to be something that caught me somehow. And that can be difficult because first sentences can end up as sort of throat clearing if you're not careful, as a kind of, particularly if your brain is still partly in essay mode. So something that from the first sentence, I think, this is interesting. I have no problem with I being part of what you're writing. If later on you end up doing kind of formal briefs, then different venues will have different ideas about, generally program notes, printed program notes in a venue don't have the perspective of the writer in them, but they sometimes do. So, Mark, you made it very personal. You use language really beautifully to evoke a scene that was memorable to you, but also that you managed to connect up with the sound of a piece and the situation of a composer and the creation of a certain piece, which has poetry in it, which was then, able to be kind of brought into it as well. You kept me reading. You didn't suddenly fall into and then it went into B flat and then the trombones came in thing, so that it wasn't the kind of lull in the middle. And so you held us through the story, and then at the end of the story, you could end in lots of different ways. You can kind of slam the curtain down, or you can do this kind of beautiful drift away. And my memory is that you led us very gently into this very beautiful story, and then you kind of took us out of it again in a way that, like somebody very gently just closing the book at the end. And by the end of it, I thought, yeah, I really want to listen to that piece again. That was another thing that I found very strongly from the pieces I thought were the best writing, were the ones that made me think, God, that's really interesting. I need to listen to that again. Or I've never heard that piece. I really want to hear it now. So something that then takes you back to the music. Those were the things that really kind of struck me from last year's entries.
That's, yeah, and I guess if I'm not in a place to give advice, but it was definitely a piece that I loved and was listening to a lot at the time, sort of go in phases. I don't think I've listened to it too much since, but it was Barbara Knoxville, somewhere 1915. Specifically the recording with Laneton Price, which I think I recommended as well.
Yeah.
It would be a shame if I didn't, but it was just definitely something I had listened to a lot and really wanted to write about. I didn't give myself, I'm going to write about whatever, this piece or that piece. So that was probably why I felt so connected to it and was able to do that.
It felt like you knew it and it felt like you loved it. And that really came across in the way that you wrote.
Kate, we may be getting another 90 applications like we did last year. Fingers crossed, let's hope so. It's very heartening. Faced with 90 applications, what character, what vibe might you like them to have? What might
Everything that Katie and Mark just said, it's if, somebody writes something and you're just thinking, I just want to listen to this piece, whether you know it or not, I want to listen to it again, or I have to go and listen to this piece now. They've sort of done the job. I think that, knowing if you know someone really knows their stuff, that comes through as well. There is that room to then sort of come outside it, step outside it, and that comes from just doing a lot of work and really loving the piece, as Mark said. That's often quite telling. You can tell what somebody thinks about a piece. I always try and fall in love with the music that I've got to write about. It's really hard, actually, if you don't love it. I always do my best. It's a real skill to create a little piece of art in itself that's hanging off another piece of art. You know what Katie said about Marx having a lovely narrative shape to it. That's really clever to be able to do that, because your piece of writing is an art form in itself, but it's supporting and enabling people to connect with another art form. I don't know if there's a word for that, but that's what you're doing. And if people can achieve that, I think I'm looking for that. Something it doesn't almost stands on its own as a beautiful little piece of art, but actually connects you to something else. That's clever.
I love that notion. We're going to come up with a name for that. That's a separate competition. So I've just got a couple of little more questions to ask you. I guess we've bounced around, we've pinballed around a whole bunch of principles for writing about classical music. But before, when I first invited you to be part of this conversation, was there anything else that we've sort of not quite hit today that you might like to share, like and recommend to anybody, not just people applying for our prize, but people writing about classical music in general? I don't want to miss a single nugget. If there anything else we can tease from you, or just reiterate your favorite one so far, perhaps.
Well, I have one just based on the fact that I spend a lot of my time in a library looking at old books about old music, which is that a lot of the resources that you might end up being able to get hold of if you're writing about a piece of music, particularly a piece of music that was written before, say, 1950, the books will be old. And by old, I mean basically anything older than about 10 or 20 years old. And that means that they're going to come with a huge number of out-of-date assumptions written into them. And it's really easy to go, well, it's a book, right? They know all the things because they wrote the book, and not necessarily think quite so critically about what it is that you're reading and the fact that the thing that you're reading is itself a historical object. So that speaks to things like the way that women are treated in a narrative if the composer is male, the way that anybody who is not white is referred to or spoken about, or non-Western European in tradition or history. Also use of words like Oriental in the way that composers or particular kinds of music are dealt with, and the whole thing about being a great composer and writing a masterpiece. Being a great composer, capital G, capital M, capital G, capital C, and writing a masterpiece, capital M. These are words that were used for a long time, and they're very loaded in their associations, as is always referring to Clara Schumann as Clara because she's the woman and Schumann is the man. They were both called Schumann. So thinking about the fact that the stuff you're going to look at that will help give you some of the information about the piece as it was written at the time might itself need you to kind of think about it. In order to really kind of tackle whether there are sorts of language that are being used there that actually are old or outdated, need thinking about unpacking a bit in the way that you then use them and write about them.
Lovely.
That would be my top tip.
I've got my top tip is if you've got the time, don't just read around the subject as well. Don't just explore the whole world that the composer was writing in. Just look at everything else that was going on as well. Try not to just think about the music, but immerse yourself in, early 20th century Russia or 19th century Paris or whatever. Just try and put yourself in that place. I like to sort of create a little scene in my head of a sense of place. It doesn't necessarily come into the writing, but I'm sure it informs it somehow. I might not be describing that scene, but I just sort of want to be in that place and just to try and bring it all to life. So I tend to read around subjects or composers a lot, especially if it's quite an obscure composer. Sometimes if there isn't a book or you can't find much, the best thing you can do is read about the context and read about the other composers who were, perhaps the more famous ones, and then you can at least put the piece or the composer that you're writing out in the right place and understand a little bit better for yourself. I think it can be equally difficult to write about a very well-known composer, where there are, more books than you'd ever get through in a lifetime, and sometimes you get a composer where there's literally nothing written about them, and they both have their own sets of challenges, and it's all hard, but sometimes you have to just think outside the box a little bit in order to construct something meaningful, and not just end up doing a sort of bar by bar, this is what's happening, but is that really what people want to know? Just look a little bit more wider context, I think.
Let's see, what could my advice? I guess for sure, the main thing, be really careful with what piece you pick. I think that was one thing that helped me for sure. What I was writing about, what I knew about it, and just the fact that it was quite a distinctive piece. Even if there's maybe a piece that is more well known or you like more, you know more about, but it's one of 41 Mozart symphonies or something, there's maybe less to talk about than there was for this kind of strange standalone soprano mini opera scene aria thing, which is somehow still in rondo form, but is about a text that had such a connection to the composer and then their world and the soprano it was written for and the circumstance. I mean, there's just so much, like you were saying, Kate, about the context of it that makes it interesting and just so much easier to write about. So it'll flow easier, and then you'll have a lot more, and something that other people can love as well. So don't force maybe a very experimental piece unless you really, really have some way to sell it. That would be also a challenge in itself. So that's sort of what I was thinking.
Share the love. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So one last question, which I didn't tell you I was going to ask you because it's only come to mind halfway through the conversation. But we've talked a lot about an activity that in almost is like your it's a service to others. You in writing about music, you do it to others. And a lot of the time people read your words, you'll never get the feedback or something. Your program that goes to a concert hall, they all buy the program. Who knows what they felt of it at all? That's just the nature of the craft. But I'd love to ask you all just like, so what's in it for you? Like, what do you get? I mean, really nice when it's paid, but I don't mean that. I mean, what does writing about music do for you, for people who love music, who care about music? What has it been, whether you've done it a lot or a little? Why in the end should we write about music for ourselves?
I think there's a huge sense of satisfaction in finding what you think are the right words to describe a piece of music. Sometimes you literally listen to a whole symphony or read a whole book just to find one adjective. It's a huge labour of love sometimes, but there's a wonderful moment, again, there should be a word for it, of finding the exact word that describes just what you want to get across. I really enjoy that. I think when you found the right words, it feels enormously satisfying. And I suppose there is if you see people buying tickets for a concert, you think, yeah, I've done all right there. I've managed to engage people, and I've sold that idea to them, and they're buying tickets. If people aren't buying tickets, I think, oh gosh, have I described this badly? Have I found the wrong words there? And so yeah, there is a lot of satisfaction, I think, on a personal level, but also and you learn so much. Oh my goodness, when I left academia, I was really worried that that part of my brain, the researching part, would just I thought, where will the satisfaction be? I've never read or listened to so much in my life as I have since I left academia. I probably shouldn't have said that, but it's true. There's always something, and it's just endless. The amount of reading, listening and research you have to do for even the tiniest little bits. And I'm so grateful for that, because the deadlines have kept me doing it, and which I probably wouldn't have done in quite the same way. So it's been a huge self-education for me as well, which I love. Just always discovering new things. That's hugely rewarding. And then they start bouncing off each other again. The more you know, the more you find out, the more you go, So discovery. Curiosity, always. I'm always endlessly curious.
Love it. Great.
I would 100% echo that yeah, I've learned so much more music and so much more about music and music history through writing CD notes and program notes and giving talks and doing bits of Radio 3 and all that sort of thing. And yeah, as Kate says, it's something that the pressure of the deadline means that you have to keep doing the work, which means that you have to keep going and finding out more things, which is brilliant. I guess what's in it for me is the opportunity to bounce up and down excitedly about something that you can share, having gone to find it out in the first place. So, you know, after all, the mechanism that we're part of here, certainly for program notes, and I guess also for what Kate's doing in terms of the listings, is some musicians come up with a really nice idea for how to play a load of stuff, and then they come and tell you, and then you go, oh, that looks interesting, and then you go away and read about it, listen to it, and you think, oh my God, this is brilliant. And also, all these pieces have this thing in common, or they all were connected to this one person, or whatever the thing is. That's incredible. And then rather than just boring the people that you live with, you can actually write it all down very excitingly in a way that means that you can share that kind of love and enthusiasm and excitement with other people in a way that, like I say, when you write about something, when you talk about something, you change the way that you then hear what follows. So it means that you get this little moment of being able to whisper in the ear of the people in the audience, hey, have you noticed this? Isn't this amazing? And they'll listen to the concert and they'll recycle the program, and your work is done, and they will probably never look at the words again. But if they remember that concert, and they also remember, you know, one adjective, like Kate said, the one adjective she searched the entire book for, then you've done it, and they'll come to another concert. And that's great, isn't it? Isn't that great?
So good.
Mark, yeah, I would say similar things. I mean, I haven't done it much, but the satisfaction of putting a little thing together and getting it sort of a little chiseled up into the right sort of sentences and structure. But then also I just think of, since I'm playing, I'd like people to continue coming to concerts to hear people play. And every time, if I can just say the right thing that people will, one, understand it, one, do enjoy it, and then three, want to come back, that's the goal. That's my little 2 cents into the jar of, introducing music to more people. So I think for me, that's the sort of thing I'm discovering and I'm looking forward to doing more of, I think.
Yeah, in the end, I think we, all of us, whatever role we play in music, we have a responsibility to tell its story and do that advocacy. So that's a great point to finish on. We're about out of time now. Alas, I could wallow in this conversation all day. It's been a real joy. I loved what Katie said about if you read Dickens or etc., you feel a bit more Dickensian. I certainly, having spent an hour in the company of these three voices, feel that much more keen to get out there, pick up my pen and get writing. So I hope people watching have too, whether you're applying for our prize or not, or just writing about music in any regard. I'm not going to say when the closing date is this year. It's coming up, on the basis that we'll leave this film on the website and hope it inspires people, not just for our prize next year and in future years, but generally. It feels really good to be out and proud and talking about writing about music, which is something we don't do very often. So for that, my huge thanks to Kate Romano and Katy Hamilton and Mark Rogers. Thanks very much, and let's all get writing.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.